What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and I'm glad you're back. I got something we need to discuss, as a matter of fact. Now, I'm going to bring you guys an update to what's going on in Ukraine. I haven't updated that in a little while, so I figured I would kind of get into that. Let's check this out. We'll read the news right quick. Zelensky rejects formally ceding Ukrainian territory, says Kyiv must be part of any negotiations. Right? So, I guess Donald Trump's pressure campaign on Putin worked, because they're supposed to be meeting in Alaska here in a few days, or like a week or something like that. I forget the exact date. It's in the news article, and I read it a little while ago, but I've made a video since then, so I don't quite remember the exact date. I think it's August 15th, but I don't want to be wrong about that, so don't quote me on that. But still, they're supposed to be meeting, and, you know, Zelensky's not going to be there, so he's quite ticked off. He's quite ticked off that Trump made some comments that they may have to cede some territory, and, you know, of course, he doesn't like that. But Trump didn't really necessarily mean ceding territory. What Trump actually said was swapping territory. That means Russia would have to give up some land. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But let's get into the news and see what the hell he's talking about here. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Saturday rejected the idea that his country would give up land to end the war with Russia after U.S. President Donald Trump suggested a peace deal could include some swapping of territories. Zelensky said Ukraine will not give Russia any awards for what it has done, and that Ukrainians will not give up their land to the occupier. The remarks came after Trump said he would meet with Vladimir Putin even if the Russian leader would not meet with Zelensky. The Trump-Putin meeting scheduled for Friday in Alaska is seen as a potential breakthrough in the more than 3 years war. Zelensky dismissed the planned summit, warning that any negotiations to end Europe's biggest conflict since World War II must include Kyiv. Any decisions that are without Ukraine are at the same time decisions against peace. They will not bring anything. They are dead decisions. They will never work, he said. Following Trump's comment, European and Ukrainian officials gathered in England with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance on Saturday. The hours-long meeting in Kent produced significant progress on trying to bring about an end to the war, according to a U.S. official who did not offer any details, including with European allies participated. The official was not authorized to speak publicly and spoke on the condition of anonymity. French President Emmanuel Macron said in a post on X before the meetings that he had talked with Zelensky, Starmer, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and that they remain determined to support Ukraine. Ukraine's future cannot be decided without Ukrainians. Europeans will also necessarily be part of the solution, as their own security is at stake, he said. In a statement posted to Telegram, Zelensky said Ukraine's territorial integrity enshrined in the Constitution must be non-negotiable. Ukrainian officials previously told the Associated Press that Kyiv would be amenable to a peace deal that would de facto recognize Ukraine's inability to regain lost territories militarily. So basically what that sounds like to me is that up front, Ukraine, you know, Zelensky is like, we're not going to cede any territory, but he realizes that they cannot regain that territory through military means, right? So I'm not sure exactly what he's trying to telegraph here, pun intended, if you will, but you know, I'm not sure what the solution to this is going to be. I think giving up some land is going to be the solution. However, I don't think he has to give up as much land as a lot of people would think. Like the current lines of control, I don't think that's ever going to happen, to be honest with you. But I think Russia needs some sort of economic corridor. And this has always been my solution, by the way, is give Russia an economic corridor through that region, if you will, so they can have access to the Black Sea. Because that's what this thing is all about. There was a soft power battle going on for decades in this area, because Russia, pretty much ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia needs access to that Black Sea. They ship a lot of oil, right? That's pretty much their bread and butter. So they need access to that Black Sea. They have a base on Crimea, a military base on Crimea that they operate. They need access to that military base. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Well, they could just shut that down or whatever. Yeah, they're not going to do that, and nobody can force them to do so. Right? So we must work within the means that we can, right? Within the legal means that we can work these with. They don't want to shut that down. They do need access to the Black Sea, in their opinion. Personally, me, I don't care. Shut them down. I don't give a damn. Honestly. That, none of this, losing the soft power battle over any sort of oil exports or imports or anything like that, any sort of access, none of this justifies invading another country and killing denizens or citizens, whatever it may be, of that country. I don't care what your excuses are, denazification. I'm sorry. Look, that's just an excuse. It's a blatant lie, right? I mean, come on, denazification, really? How come that hasn't taken place before? Why didn't that happen after World War II? Why didn't that happen when it was the Soviet Union, for crying out loud? Like, come on, get out of here with that nonsense. But look, I understand where Putin is coming from here. There's been a lot of NATO encroachment into that area, so he's like, screw this. The walls are closing in. He's going to do what he's going to do. But it's plain to see that all of this fear-mongering, that, Putin just wants to conquer Europe, for crying out loud. He wants to reunite the old Soviet Union. That's a bunch of nonsense, y'all. Don't buy into the BS. It really is BS, because he hasn't shown any sort of will whatsoever. Whatsoever. Do we really believe that Russia could not conquer Ukraine? Do we really believe that? If they wanted to, do we think that Russia does not have the ability to bomb Kyiv into oblivion? Do we think that? I mean, sure, what they've shown in this war has telegraphed exactly that, right? You would think. They have the military manpower, and they could have done so if they wanted to. But they restrained themselves, as a matter of fact. They didn't bomb the west part of Ukraine. Hardly at all. Sure, they bombed Kyiv, and they invaded from the north. But I think that was mostly a distraction, so they could come in and clinch and take that territory in the south, because that's what they wanted. He wants that access to the Black Sea. That was all a distraction right at the beginning of the war, because if you look at the lines of control, that's pretty much it since the beginning of the war. Those lines of control have not changed that much. That's what I believe, though. That's just my personal opinion. This is mostly about economics. Wars are almost always about resources and money. So there you go. It is what it is. But we're going to have to see what happens. I do believe that if you see some sort of economic, like Ukraine gets to retain control of their sovereign land, right? They have control of that land. But there is an economic corridor that would allow for Russia access to that Black Sea. That, right, Ukraine still controls it, and they could charge a tax or something like that anytime Russia needs to go through there and access all this. Some sort of low, like a toll fee or something like that. I think personally that's how this comes to a solution, because then once again, Ukraine's territorial integrity is resolved right there. They regain control of all this, and it also at the same time allows Russia access to that Black Sea. So, they want to build a pipeline through the Turkey Qatar pipeline, I believe it is. Maybe as one of those pipelines, I forget. But anyway, let's keep going, because we got a little bit more news. The Trump-Putin meeting may prove pivotal in a war that began when Russia invaded its western neighbor and has led to tens of thousands of deaths. You mean hundreds of thousands of deaths? Although there is no guarantee it will stop the fighting, since Moscow and Kyiv remain far apart on their conditions for peace. It seems entirely logical for our delegation to fly across the Bering Strait simply, and for such an important and anticipated summit of the leaders of the two countries to be held in Alaska. Putin's Foreign Affairs Advisor, Yuri Ushakov, Ushakov said Saturday in a statement posted to the Kremlin's news channel. In his comment at the White House Friday, Trump gave no details on the swapping of territories. Analysts, including some close to the Kremlin, have suggested that Russia could offer to give up territory it controls outside of the 4 regions it claims to have annexed. Trump said his meeting with Putin would come before any sit-down discussion involving Zelensky. His announcement that he planned to host one of America's adversaries on U.S. soil broke with expectations they'd met in a third country. Nigel Gould Davies, a senior fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, told the AP that the symbology of holding the summit in Alaska was clear and that the location naturally favors Russia. How? How does that naturally favor Russia? I'm curious if they'll explain that. It's easy to imagine Putin making the point. Once we had this territory and we gave it to you, therefore Ukraine had this territory and now should give it to us, he said, referring to the 1867 transaction known as the Alaska Purchase when Russia sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million. Are you kidding me on this? That because Russia sold Alaska to the United States, that the symbology of meeting in that sold off territory means that Ukraine should be forced to give up territory? Are they suggesting here that Russia is going to purchase that territory? Is that the suggestion here? It doesn't sound like it because he said give up territory. That is one of the most ridiculous statements I've heard from a world leader in my entire freaking life. The symbology. These people are deranged. They're just lunatics. I really don't think the symbology matches to reality, as a matter of fact. Right? It's just a meeting, my dude. It doesn't have any symbolic meaning behind it. They're just meeting in Alaska, for crying out loud, and that's it. Like, what is that guy even talking about? On the streets of Kyiv, reactions to the idea of Ukraine ceding territory to Russia ranged from skepticism to quiet resignation. Oh, that's not very appealing. It may not be capitulation, but it would be a loss, said Ihor, I can't even pronounce that, a 67-year-old pensioner who said he would consider ceding territory on condition for some compensation and possibly some reparations. There you go. Anastasia Yemenilanova, 31, said she was torn. Honestly, I have 2 answers to that question. The first is a person who loves her country. I don't want to compromise within myself, she told the AP. But seeing all these deaths and knowing that my mother is now living in Nikopol under shelling and my father is fighting, I want all this to end as soon as possible. Svetlana Dobrinskaya, whose son died fighting, rejected outright concessions but supported halting combat to save lives. We don't have the opportunity to launch an offensive to recapture our territories, the 57-year-old pensioner said, but to prevent people from dying, we can simply stop military operations, sign some kind of agreement, but not give up our territories. Yeah, I don't think they know what's going on here. You can't just sign some sort of agreement and not capitulate anything if that's what part of the deal is, right? Like, sure, there could be a deal that could agree to those conditions, but I really don't think that's going to happen at this point. I think Ukraine is going to have to cede something at this point, right? Is that the right thing? Do I agree with that? Not necessarily. You know, on a moral standpoint, Russia should just get up and leave. They have no say-so in the matter. Morally, that's the reality of the situation. But, you know, we don't always live in a morally idealistic world, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. Like I said, I think my solution is probably the best solution, you know, best possible scenario here, but, you know, Putin's a greedy guy. He's kind of a scumbag, dictatorial kind of dude, so we just have no idea what's going to happen. I think Zelensky's living in a pipe dream to think that he's not going to have to cede any territory whatsoever. Look, I get it. I understand why he's trying to telegraph that to everybody, but I think he knows that deep down. that there is no easy solution to this. You're not just going to be able to bloviate your way to Russia just getting up and leaving, for crying out loud. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll see what happens with all this. And I just wanted to give you guys that update. So y'all let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comment section, because this has a lot of moving parts, y'all. There's a lot of history to this area. There's a lot that's going on here, you know, so we need to stay vigilant, stay on top of news stories like this. You know, Donald Trump, he needs to be able to get this war brought to an end. That would cap off his presidency quite well, I think. But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got. Y'all don't forget to smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here. Share this video anywhere and all over the place all at the same time if you could. That would be great. And if you also could, it'd be lovely, even better, if you could sign up and become a member. I would love you to death if you could do that. But y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.